Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video I'll be discussing briefly issue number 1 of IDW's Star Trek Year 4, written by David Tishman, with art and colors by Steve Conley and Leonard O'Grady, respectively, letters by Robbie Robbins, and edits by Dan Taylor. This first issue is an interesting one, to say the least, because for me, at the get-go, it definitely embodies and even expounds upon Star Trek the original series, and all of those characters we know and love, from Kirk and Spock to Sulu and Chekhov. And they even add in, for a little bit of extra flavor, a little bit of a Star Trek the Animated Series feel, with characters like Maress. And I just find it very interesting. Now, I also have a large complaint with the issue that has to do with how the story is wrapped up. The story being that the Enterprise, while out on its 5-year mission, of course, in the beginning of Year 4, they find a sort of almost genetic helix of planets that are interconnected, and it's very interesting because it looks like a genetic code. They read 20 life signs on one of the nearest planets when this whole area could have inhabited somewhere upwards of 800 million, and there's not really much explored as to how all that life has gone away and things like that. It is passed off with a throwaway line about how this particular society was so advanced that they sort of were, their own undoing with all their technological advances and stuff like that. One of the things I commend this particular issue about in the depiction of the story is it takes an almost very Forbidden Planet-esque turn, in that you have this scientist by the name of Othello Beck, who is well known to Dr. McCoy and very renowned in his, study of medicine and sciences, who uncovers this hidden technology deep down within one of the planets, very much akin to, as I say, the movie Forbidden Planet, where Dr. Morbius was very much an Earthman scientist doctor who found, for an unknown species, a whole level of intelligence and technology deep down within one of the planets. And whereas he tapped the id, the subconscious of the mind, and unleashed horrors from it unwittingly, this particular scientist is looking more into the genetic manipulation and creating clones and creating sort of carbon copy beings of the aliens who used to live there, as well as offshoots of himself and his wife. And his wife actually plays into a large part how this story comes to a close. Now, for me, as you have Kirk and Spock and McCoy sort of investigating the area, at some point the Enterprise comes under fire because of some mistakes that are happening with these carbon copy beings, and this really offsets Othello Beck. He's very upset by it. It seems that everything he's doing is being undermined by these beings that he's created, of his own creation. And it's kind of the Frankenstein effect. The monster has run amok, and it doesn't quite understand what it's doing is harmful. And so, there comes a point where Kirk ends up stumbling onto Othello Beck's wife, who is what looks to be a dying elderly Vulcan lady, and she wishes for him to kill her. And this is when, Kirk is, of course, somewhat usually, as you would see in the original series, banged over the back of the head, knocked out, and he wakes up in a cell with McCoy later. This after Spock has returned to the Enterprise and tried to get out of the area to, try to preserve the ship as long as possible. And the resolution of the particular story really has no impact on the characters, is not instigated by the characters. They just sort of find a way out of their cell, which I thought was actually very creative, in the fact that, usually they have a sidearm, a phaser, as well as a communicator on their person when they beam down to a planet or what have you. And in this case, Kirk is taken to hiding, phaser down in his boot, which McCoy is incredulous about. And, once they've escaped, well, all of a sudden Othello Beck has killed all of the beings of his creation, as well as himself and his wife, and there's no real resolution. They just kind of go on their merry way. And in effect, what you have is, a lot of throwaway exposition toward the end, dialogue that's basically telling us what we should have found out as the story progresses, that Dr. Beck was trying to reverse the effects of a genetic disease that his wife was suffering from, keeping her alive and keeping her suffering going, as Kirk notes toward the end, which is very unfortunate, of course. And I guess we're meant to assume that there has been some passage of time in the last two panels between the end of the story and when these last two panels takes place, as Spock is letting Kirk know that Starfleet has already begun exploring the laboratory that the good doctor had found, and all of these mysterious technologies. It really just sort of builds to a penultimate anticlimax as far as I'm concerned, instead of having the story be fleshed out and come to a real culmination. The last 8 pages or so are just ads for other IDW titles that could have been better utilized to fill out this story's ending that much more. And so, while I really highly regard the art as being just fantastic looking, and the story setting up in its beginning and sort of toward the middle being very, very interesting and keeping me wanting to read it, lo and behold, by the end, it just was a severe disappointment, because it was like, well, what the hell was that? I really, have to give it low marks for that. If I were to grade it only by the art and sort of the middle point of the story, I would definitely have given it a 4.5 out of 5, but I'm lowering that to 3.5 out of 5 by the end, because it just didn't come to a culmination that I felt was satisfactory enough, especially with all that area, all that space at the end of the book that could have really fleshed out the story much better. So definitely I give them points for trying to capture or recapture, if you will, the TOS vibe of Star Trek. They definitely nailed it on the head as far as I was concerned. Until that ending, it just really unraveled the entire ball of yarn for me. And otherwise, that'll be it for me on this one. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you're a Star Trek fan, if you've ever picked up IDW's Star Trek Year 4, what did you think of the issues? Do they get better from issue number 1 on? I'd absolutely love to check out the trade at some point someday, if there is a trade release collecting several issues of this, because I'd be curious to see if this is something they get over as the stories progress. And otherwise, that'll be it for me, and I'll catch you later. Peace.